In this video, we'll go over the top 200 drugs used in pharmacy. Quick disclaimer before we get started. There are 245 drugs in this video instead of 200 to account for differences in prescribing trends and location. So this should be an inclusive list of the top 200 drugs wherever you may be. I've only included the most common brand names, but do keep in mind that many drugs have multiple brand names. There are more indications for these drugs, especially off-label uses, but the ones I've included should be sufficient for PTCE testing. I've also left off the salt substances and inhalation mechanisms in the names for ease of memorization. It's also important to know that starting in 2020, the content for PTCE testing changed so that 40% is now related to medications. Previously, only 13.75% of the content was pharmacology. Also, here are a few helpful tips with memorization. Generally, brand names are shorter than generic names. The suffixes in drug names are usually indicative of classification and indication. And in this video, the drugs are sorted alphabetically by generic name, but in a later video, I'll separate these drugs by class, because it makes memorization so much easier when you can recognize what class the drug is in just by looking at the name. I really want to stress this point because it really does make memorization so much easier, and it can help you understand other drugs other than those listed in this video. Depending on your learning style, making flashcards or mnemonics can make memorization easier. One way of making this fun is by having someone test you using flashcards or a list. Retention decreases with increased time spent studying, so don't try to cram all this information at once. Instead, study several times a day for shorter intervals. When you're comfortable with most of the drugs, try following along in your head before the next portion pops up on the screen. And finally, you can download the audio using a YouTube to MP3 converter and play it back whenever you're missing the sound of my voice. We'll start off with generic name, then brand name, followed by classification and indication. C2 drugs are in red font, C3 through 5 drugs are in blue font, and everything else is in black. Let's get started. Acetaminophen, or Tylenol, is an analgesic used for mild pain and fever. Acyclovir, or Zovirax, is a nucleoside antiviral used for cold sores, herpes, and shingles. Albuterol, or Ventolin or ProAir or Proventil, is a beta-2 agonist used for acute asthma, shortness of breath, and bronchospasms. Alendronate, or Fosamax, is a bisphosphonate used for bone health and osteoporosis. Allopurinol, or Alloprim or Xyloprim, is a xanthine oxidase inhibitor used for gout and hyperuricemia. Alprazolam, or Xanax, is a benzodiazepine used for anxiety and panic. Amiodarone, or Cordarone, is an antiarrhythmic used for irregular heart rhythm. Amitriptyline, or Elavil, is a tricyclic antidepressant used for depression, insomnia, and neuralgia. Amlodipine, or Norvasc, is a calcium channel blocker used for hypertension and angina. Amoxicillin, or Amoxil, is a penicillin antibiotic used for bacterial infections. Amoxicillin with clavulanate, or Augmentin, is a penicillin and beta-lactamase inhibitor antibiotic used for bacterial infections. Amphetamine with dextroamphetamine, or Adderall, is a central nervous system stimulant used for ADHD and narcolepsy. Anastrozole, or Arimidex, is a cytostatic aromatase inhibitor used for breast cancer. Apixaban, or Eliquis, is an anticoagulant used for preventing blood clot formations or thromboembolic prophylaxis. Aripiprazole, or Abilify, is an atypical antipsychotic used for depression and bipolar disorder. Aspirin, or Ecotrin, is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug or platelet aggregation inhibitor used for pain, fever, and thromboembolic prophylaxis. Atenolol, or Tenormin, is a beta blocker used for hypertension and angina. Atomoxetine, or Strattera, is a selective norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor used for ADHD, depression, and bipolar disorder. Atorvastatin, or Lipitor, is a HMG-CoA reductase inhibitor used for hypercholesterolemia. Azelastine, or Astellin, is a histamine H1 antagonist used for allergy symptoms. Azithromycin, or Zithromex, or Z-Pak, is a macrolide antibiotic used for bacterial infections. Baclofen, or Leorisol, is a skeletal muscle relaxant used for muscle spasms and musculoskeletal pain. Beclomethasone, or QVAR, is a corticosteroid used for asthma. Benazepril, or Lotensin, is an angiotensin-converting enzyme inhibitor used for hypertension and heart failure. Benzonatate, or Tessalon pearls, is an antitussive used for coughing and hiccups. Umatoprost, or Lumigan, is an ophthalmic prostaglandin used for intraocular pressure and glaucoma. Bisacodyl, or Dulcolax, is a laxative used for constipation. Bisoprolol, or Zebeda, is a beta blocker used for hypertension. Brimonidine, or Alphagen P, or Lumify, is an alpha-2 agonist used for intraocular pressure and glaucoma. Budesonide with formoterol, or Symbicort, is a beta-2 agonist with a corticosteroid used for asthma, wheezing, shortness of breath, and COPD. Buprenorphine with naloxone, or Suboxone, is a partial opioid agonist used for opioid dependence. Bupropion, or Wellbutrin, is a dopamine and norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor used for depression and smoking cessation. Buspirone, or Buspar, is a miscellaneous anti-anxiety agent used for anxiety. Butalbital with acetaminophen with caffeine, or Fioricet, is an analgesic and barbiturate combination used for migraines and tension headaches. Conagliflozin, or Invokana, is a sodium glucose cotransporter 2 inhibitor used for diabetes. Carbamazepine, or Tegretol, is an anticonvulsant used for seizures, neuralgia, and bipolar disorder. Carbidopa with levodopa, or Lodocin, is a decarboxylase inhibitor and dopamine precursor used for Parkinson's disease and impaired motor functions. Carisoprodol, or Soma, is a skeletal muscle relaxant used for muscle spasms and musculoskeletal pain. Carvedilol, or Coreg, is a beta blocker used for hypertension, heart failure, and angina. Cefdinir, or Omnicef, is a cephalosporin antibiotic used for bacterial infections. Cefurozine, or Ceftin, is a cephalosporin antibiotic used for bacterial infections. Celecoxib, or Celebrex, is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug used for pain, swelling, and arthritis. Cephalexin, or Keflex, is a cephalosporin antibiotic used for bacterial infections. Cetirizine, or Zyrtec, is a histamine H1 antagonist used for allergy symptoms and hives. Chlorhexidine, or Paradex, is an oral antibiotic used for gingivitis and periodontitis. Chlorothalidone, or Hygrotron, is a diuretic used for hypertension and edema. Cimetidine, or Tagamet, is a histamine H2 antagonist used for heartburn, gastroesophageal reflux disease, and indigestion. Ciprofloxacin, or Cipro, is a fluoroquinolone antibiotic used for bacterial infections. Citalopram, or Celexa, is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor used for anxiety, depression, and OCD. Clarithromycin, or Biaxin, is a macrolide antibiotic used for bacterial infections. Clindamycin, or Cleocin, is a lincosamide antibiotic used for bacterial infections. Clobazam, or Onfi, is a benzodiazepine used for seizures. Clobetasol, or Temovate, is a corticosteroid used for inflammation. Clonazepam, or Klonopin, is a benzodiazepine used for anxiety, seizures, and panic. Clonidine, or Catapres, is an alpha-2 agonist used for hypertension and ADHD. Clopidogrel, or Plavix, is a platelet aggregation inhibitor used to prevent blood clot formation or thromboembolic prophylaxis. Clotrimazole, or Lotrimin, is an imidazole antifungal agent used for fungal infections. Codeine with acetaminophen, or Tylenol number 3, is an analgesic with an opioid combination, used for mild to moderate pain. Colchicine, or Colchris, is an anti-gout agent, used for gout. Cyclobenzaprine, or Flexeril, is a muscle relaxant, used for muscle spasms and musculoskeletal pain. Dapagliflozin, or Farxiga, is a sodium glucose cotransporter 2 inhibitor used for diabetes. Dexamethasone, or Decadron, is a corticosteroid used for inflammation. Dexmethylphenidate, or Focalin, is a central nervous system stimulant used for ADHD. Dextromethorphan, or Delsum or Robitussin, is an antitussive used for cough. Diazepam, or Valium, is a benzodiazepine used for anxiety, seizures, and muscle spasms. Diclofenac, or Voltaren, is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug used for pain and arthritis. Dicyclomine, or Bentyl, is an anticholinergic agent used for abdominal pain and cramps and irritable bowel syndrome. Digoxin, or Lanoxin, is a cardiac glycoside used for irregular heart rhythm and heart failure. Diltiazem, or Cardizem, is a calcium channel blocker used for hypertension and angina. Diphenhydramine, or Benadryl or Siladril, is a histamine H1 antagonist used for allergy symptoms and hives. Devalproex, or Depakote, is an anticonvulsant used for seizures, bipolar disorder, and migraines. Docusate, or Colace, is a stool softener used for constipation. Donepezil, or Aricept, is a cholinesterase inhibitor used for Alzheimer's, memory, or dementia. Doxazocin, or Cardura, is an alpha-1 blocker used for hypertension and benign prostatic hyperplasia. Doxepin, or Silanor, is a tricyclic antidepressant used for anxiety, depression, and insomnia. Doxycycline, or Vibramycin, is a tetracycline antibiotic used for bacterial infections. Dulaglutide, or Trulicity, is a glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor antagonist used for diabetes. Duloxetine, or Cymbalta, is a serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor used for depression and anxiety. Empagliflozin, or Jardiance, is a sodium glucose cotransporter 2 inhibitor used for diabetes. Enalapril, or Vasotec, is an angiotensin-converting enzyme inhibitor used for hypertension and heart failure. Ergocalciferol, or vitamin D2, or Drisdol, is a vitamin D supplement used for vitamin D deficiency. Escitalopram, or Lexapro, is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor used for depression and anxiety. Esomeprazole, or Nexium, is a proton pump inhibitor used for heartburn, GERD, or indigestion. Estradiol, or Uvafem, is an endocrine metabolic agent used for menopause symptoms. Estrogens, or Premarin, is an estrogen derivative used for menopause symptoms. Esopicolone, or Lunesta, is a hypnotic used for insomnia. Ethinyl estradiol with norethindrone, or Lena, is a contraceptive used for routine contraception. Ethinyl estradiol with norgestimate, or Trilosprintec, is a contraceptive used for routine contraception. Etodolac, or Lodine, is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug used for pain and arthritis. Ezetimibe, or Zetia, is a sterol transporter inhibitor used for hypercholesterolemia. Famotidine, or Pepcid, is a histamine H2 antagonist used for heartburn, GERD, and indigestion. Fenofibrate, or Tricor, is a fibric acid derivative used for hypertriglyceridemia or hypercholesterolemia. Fentanyl, or Actique or Duragesic, is an opiate agonist used for severe around-the-clock pain. Ferrous sulfate, or Infed, is an iron supplement used for iron deficiency. Fexofenadine, or Allegra, is a histamine H1 antagonist used for allergy symptoms or hives. Finasteride, or Propecia or Proscar, is a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor used for BPH or male pattern hair loss. Flecainide, or Tambicor, is an antiarrhythmic used for irregular heart rhythm. Fluconazole, or Diflucan, is an azole antifungal used for fungal infections. Fluoxetine, or Prozac, is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor used for depression, panic, or OCD. Fluticasone by nasal inhalation, or Flonase, is a corticosteroid used for allergy symptoms. Fluticasone by oral inhalation, or Flovent, is a corticosteroid used for asthma and COPD. Fluticasone with salmeterol, or Advair, is a corticosteroid with a beta-2 agonist used for asthma and COPD. Folic acid, or Folacin, is a folic acid supplement used for folate deficiency. Furosemide, or Lasix, is a loop diuretic used for hypertension and edema. Gabapentin, or Neurontin, is an anticonvulsant used for neuralgia and seizures. Gemfibrozil, or Lopid, is a fibric acid derivative used for hypertriglyceridemia or hypercholesterolemia. Glimepiride, or Amaryl, is a sulfonylurea used for diabetes. Glipizide, or Glucotrol, is a sulfonylurea used for diabetes. Glyburide, or Diabeta, is a sulfonylurea used for diabetes. Guaifenesin, or Mucinex, is an expectorant used for cough or to loosen phlegm. Hydralazine, or Apresyline, is an arteriolar smooth muscle agent used for hypertension. Hydrochlorothiazide, or Microzide, is a thiazide diuretic used for hypertension and edema. Hydrocodone with acetaminophen, or Norco, is an analgesic with an opioid combination used for moderate to severe pain. Hydrocortisone, or Solu-Cortef, is a corticosteroid used for itching and inflammation. Hydromorphone, or Dilaudid, is an opioid agonist used for moderate to severe pain. Hydroxychloroquine, or Plaquenil, is an anti-rheumatic with anti-malarial properties used for malaria, rheumatoid arthritis, or lupus. Hydroxyzine, or Atarax, or Vistaril, is an anti-anxiety agent or an antihistamine used for anxiety and itching. Abandronate, or Boniva, is a bisphosphonate used for bone health and osteoporosis. Ibuprofen, or Motrin, or Advil, is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug used for pain and fever. Imipramine, or Tofranil, is a tricyclic antidepressant used for depression. Indapamide, or Lozol, is a diuretic used for hypertension and edema. Indomethacin, or Indocin, is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug used for pain, swelling, and gout. Insulin aspartate, or Novolog, is a rapid-acting insulin used for diabetes. Insulin detemir, or Levemir, is a long-acting insulin used for diabetes. Insulin glargine, or Lantus, or Basaglar, or Tuheo, is a long-acting insulin used for diabetes. Insulin Lispro, or Humalog, or Admelog, is a rapid-acting insulin used for diabetes. Irbesartan, or Avapro, is an angiotensin II receptor blocker used for hypertension or diabetic nephropathy. Isosorbide, or Imdir, is a nitrate used for angina. Ketoconazole, or Nizoral, is an azole antifungal, used for fungal infections. Labetalol, or Trandate, is a beta blocker, used for hypertension. Lamotrigine, or Lamictal, is a miscellaneous anticonvulsant, used for seizures and mood swings. Lansoprazole, or Prevacid, is a proton pump inhibitor, used for heartburn, GERD, and indigestion. Latanoprost, or Zalatan, is an anti-glaucoma agent, used for intraocular pressure and glaucoma. Levetiracetam, or Keppra, is an anticonvulsant, used for seizures. Levofloxacin, or Levaquin, is a fluoroquinolone antibiotic, used for bacterial infections. Levonorgestrel, or Plan B, is a contraceptive, used for emergency contraception. Levothyroxine, or Synthroid, or Levoxel, is a thyroid agent, used for hypothyroidism. Linagliptin, or Tradjenta, is a dipeptidyl peptidase 4 inhibitor, used for diabetes. Liraglutide, or Victoza, is a glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor agonist, used for diabetes. Lisdexamfetamine, or Vyvanse, is a CNS stimulant, used for ADHD and binge eating disorder. Lisinopril, or Prenavil, is an angiotensin-converting enzyme inhibitor, used for hypertension and heart failure. Loperamide, or Imodium, is an antidiarrheal, used for diarrhea. Loratadine, or Claritin, is a histamine H1 antagonist, used for allergy symptoms and hives. Lorazepam, or Ativan, is a benzodiazepine, used for anxiety, insomnia, and nausea. Losartan, or Cozar, is an angiotensin II receptor blocker, used for hypertension. Losartan with hydrochlorothiazide, or Hyzar, is an angiotensin II receptor blocker with a thiazide diuretic combination, used for hypertension and edema. Lovastatin, or Mevacor, is an HMG-CoA reductase inhibitor, used for hypercholesterolemia. Meclizine, or Antivert, is an antiemetic, used for nausea, vomiting, and dizziness. Meloxicam, or Mobic, is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug, used for pain and inflammation. Memantine, or Namenda, is an NMDA receptor antagonist, used for Alzheimer's, memory, and dementia. Metformin, or glucophage, is a biguanide, used for blood sugar control and diabetes. Methadone, or Dolofen, is an opioid agonist, used for moderate to severe pain and opioid dependence. Methocarbamol, or Robaxin, is a muscle relaxant, used for muscle spasms and musculoskeletal pain. Methotrexate, or Trexol, is an anti-neoplastic agent, used for cancer, inflammation, and rheumatoid arthritis. Methylphenidate, or Concerta, or Ritalin, is a CNS stimulant, used for ADHD and narcolepsy. Methylprednisolone, or Medrol, is a glucocorticoid, used for inflammation and steroid-responsive disorders. Metoprolol, or Toprol, or Lopressor, is a beta blocker, used for hypertension, heart failure, and angina. Metronidazole, or Flagyl, is an anti-infective agent, used for bacterial infections. Miconazole, or Monistat, is an azole antifungal, used for fungal infections. Mirtazapine, or Remeron, is a tetracyclic antidepressant, used for depression and insomnia. Montelukast, or Singulair, is a leukotriene receptor antagonist, used for allergy symptoms and asthma. Morphine, or MS-Contin, is an opioid agonist, used for severe pain. Mupirocin, or Bactroban, is a topical antibacterial agent, used for bacterial infections. Nadolol, or Corgard, is a beta blocker, used for hypertension and angina. Naloxone, or Narcan, is an opioid antagonist, used for opioid overdose. Naproxen, or Aleve, or Naproxen, is a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug used for pain, fever, and inflammation. Nebivolol, or Bistolic, is a beta blocker used for hypertension. Nifedipine, or Procardia, is a calcium channel blocker used for hypertension and angina. Nitrofurantoin, or Macrobid, is a nitrofuran derivative antibiotic used for urinary tract infections and bacterial infections. Nitroglycerin, or Nitrostat, is a nitrate used for angina. Nortriptyline, or Pamelor, is a tricyclic antidepressant used for depression and insomnia. Nystatin, or Nystop, is a polyene antifungal used for fungal infections. Olanzapine, or Zyprexa, is an antipsychotic used for depression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. Olmesartan, or Benicar, is an angiotensin II receptor blocker used for hypertension. Omega-3 acid ethyl esters, or Lovaza, is an omega-3 dyslipidemia agent used for hypertriglyceridemia or hypercholesterolemia. Omeprazole, or Prilosec, is a proton pump inhibitor used for heartburn, GERD, and indigestion. Ondansetron, or Zofran, is an antiemetic used for nausea and vomiting. Oseltamivir, or Tamiflu, is a neuroamidase antiviral inhibitor used to reduce flu symptoms. Oxcarbazepine, or Trileptal, is an anticonvulsant used for seizures. Oxybutynin, or Ditropan, is an antimuscarinic agent used for overactive bladder or incontinence. Oxycodone, or OxyContin, is an opioid agonist used for moderate to severe pain. Oxycodone with acetaminophen, or Percocet, is an opioid agonist with a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug used for moderate to severe pain. Pantoprazole, or Protonix, is a proton pump inhibitor for heartburn, GERD, or indigestion. Paroxetine, or Paxil, is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor for depression, anxiety, panic, and OCD. Phenazopyridine, or Azo or Pyridium, is an analgesic used for urinary pain relief. Phentermine, or Adipex, is a CNS stimulant used for weight loss and obesity. Phenytoin, or Dilantin, is an anticonvulsant for seizures. Pioglitazone, or Actos, is a glitazone used for diabetes. Polyethylene glycol, or Miralax, is a laxative used for constipation. Potassium, or Chlorcon, is an electrolyte supplement used for hypokalemia. Pramipexole, or Mirapex, is a dopamine agonist used for Parkinson's disease, impaired motor function, or restless leg syndrome. Pravastatin, or Pravachol, is an HMG-CoA reductase inhibitor used for hypercholesterolemia. Prazosin, or Minopres, is an alpha-1 blocker used for hypertension. Prednisolone, or Omnipred, is a corticosteroid used for inflammation. Prednisone, or Deltazone, is a corticosteroid used for inflammation. Pregabalin, or Lyrica, is an anticonvulsant used for neuralgia and seizures. Promethazine, or Phenergan, is a histamine H1 antagonist used for nausea, vomiting, and allergy symptoms. Propranolol, or Inderol, is a beta blocker used for hypertension, angina, and heart failure. Pseudoephedrine, or Sudafed, is an alpha and beta adrenergic agonist used for sinus and nasal congestion. Quetiapine, or Seroquel, is an atypical antipsychotic used for depression, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia. Quinapril, or Acupril, is an angiotensin-converting enzyme inhibitor used for hypertension and heart failure. Rabeprazole, or Acefex, is a proton pump inhibitor used for heartburn, GERD, and indigestion. Ramipril, or Altase, is an angiotensin-converting enzyme inhibitor used for hypertension and heart failure. Ranitidine, or Zantac, is a histamine H2 antagonist used for heartburn, GERD, and indigestion. Risendronate, or Actonel, is a bisphosphonate used for bone loss and osteoporosis. Risperidone, or Risperdal, is a serotonin dopamine antagonist used for schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Rivaroxaban, or Xarelto, is an anticoagulant used to prevent blood clot formation and thromboembolic prophylaxis. Rizatriptan, or Maxalt, is a selective serotonin agonist used for migraines. Ropinirole, or Requip, is a dopamine agonist used for Parkinson's disease, impaired motor functions, or restless leg syndrome. Rosuvastatin, or Crestor, is an HMG-CoA reductase inhibitor used for hypercholesterolemia. Semaglutide, or Ozempic, is a glucagon-like peptide 1 receptor used for diabetes. Senna, or Senecot, is a laxative used for constipation. Sertraline, or Zoloft, is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor used for depression, anxiety, and panic. Sildenafil, or Viagra, is a phosphodiesterase 5 enzyme inhibitor used for erectile dysfunction. Simethicone, or Gas-X, is an anti-flatulent agent used for bloating and stomach discomfort. Simvastatin, or Zocor, is an HMG-CoA reductase inhibitor used for hypercholesterolemia. Sitagliptin, or Januvia, is a dipeptidyl peptidase 4 inhibitor used for diabetes. Spironolactone, or Aldactone, is a potassium-sparing diuretic used for hypertension and edema. Sulfamethoxazole with trimethoprim, or Bactrim or Septra, is a sulfonamide and trimethoprim antibiotic combination used for bacterial infections. Sumatriptan, or Imitrex, is a serotonin receptor agonist used for migraines. Tacrolimus, or Prograf, is a calcineurin inhibitor used to prevent organ rejection. Tadalafil, or Cialis, is a phosphodiesterase 5 enzyme inhibitor used for erectile dysfunction. Tamoxifen, or Nolvadex, is a selective estrogen receptor modulator used for breast cancer. Tamsulosin, or Flomax, is an alpha blocker used for benign prostatic hyperplasia or ureteral stones. Telmisartan, or Micardis, is an angiotensin II receptor blocker used for hypertension. Temazepam, or Restoril, is a benzodiazepine used for insomnia. Terazosin, or Hytrin, is an alpha blocker used for hypertension or benign prostatic hyperplasia. Testosterone, or Androgel, is an androgen used for hormone replacement. Timolol, or Betamol, is a beta blocker used for intraocular pressure and glaucoma. Tiotropium, or Spiriva, is a long-acting muscarinic antagonist used for asthma and COPD. Tizanidine, or Xanaflex, is a muscle relaxant used for muscle spasms and musculoskeletal pain. Topiramate, or Topamax, is an anticonvulsant used for seizures and migraines. Tramadol, or Ultram, is an opioid agonist used for moderate pain. Trazodone, or Deseril, is a serotonin reuptake inhibitor used for depression and insomnia. Tretinoin, or Retin-A, is a retinoic acid derivative used for acne or photoaging. Triamcinolone, or Kenalog, is a corticosteroid used for itching, inflammation, and rashes. Triamterene with hydrochlorothiazide, or Maxide, is a potassium-sparing diuretic and thiazide diuretic combination used for hypertension and edema. Valacyclovir, or Valtrex, is a nucleoside antiviral used for viral infections. Valsartan, or Diovan, is an angiotensin II receptor blocker, used for hypertension and heart failure. Vancomycin, or vancomycin, is a glycopeptide antibiotic, used for bacterial infections. Venlafaxine, or Effexor, is a serotonin norepinephrine reuptake inhibitor, used for anxiety, depression, and panic. Verapamil, or Calin, is a calcium channel blocker, used for hypertension and angina. Vitamin B12, or cyanocobalamin, is a water-soluble vitamin used for vitamin B12 deficiency and anemia. Warfarin, or Coumadin, is an anticoagulant used to prevent blood clot formation and thromboembolic prophylaxis. Zolpidem, or Ambien, is a hypnotic used for insomnia. And that's the top 200 drugs. Thanks for watching, and if you find this content helpful, please like and share the video. Also consider subscribing for similar content in the future.